I want to proclaim as Christians that we do not have to fear man. We don't have to fear the giant, no matter how big he seems to be, no matter who he is, no matter where he's at in a social class. You and I don't have to fear. You know why? Because we have God on our side. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Real Truth with Pastor Ricky Faircloth. This is episode 9. And again, we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks the issue of fear. And I'm going to dive into a little bit more about fear today. But as we've talked about this week, we've talked about different types of fear. And today I want to get into a type of fear that we deal with, and many of us unknowingly deal with this type of fear. I'm going to read out of the book of Psalms. And it's probably a very familiar verse to you. Hopefully some of you, it's going to be Psalm 23. But before I get into that, I told you earlier in the week that I had taken a trip to Israel at the first of the year. And, when we were in Israel, we went to a place known as the Valley of the Shadow of Death. It was between Jerusalem and Jericho, and it was just a beautiful mountainous rocky area. And as I stood on top of a mountain and I looked down, they had the tour guide was explaining to us that this was what was known as the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And as you look down, it was a deep canyon with a river running between it. And our understanding was when men used to go between Jerusalem and Jericho, they would walk. Many of them would walk through this valley, what was known as the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And there were people that lived in caves, and they would, if people were coming through without guides, shepherds, people that were walking with them, a lot of times that they would be overtaken by thieves and robbers and people that just really sought to do them harm. But this became known as the Valley of the Shadow of Death. Now, the reason I tell you this is because we're going to read Psalm 23, and I want you to hear me. I want you to hear what I have to say. Bible says in Psalm 23, of course, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. Now, notice that the idea that God makes us to lie down in green pastures is really not an option for us. He just does that intentionally because of his love. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And then verse 4 says this, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Now, we've talked about this week all kinds of different types of fear. The fear of man. We've talked about the fear of a gift that is in us and that needs to come out. We've talked about fear of pandemics and we've talked about all kinds of different fears over the course of the week. But what I want to express to you today is there is a fear, and maybe perhaps the greatest fear, and the reason it is because we just are not aware of what it is the fear of evil. In fact, many doctors today, scientists, things like that, are asked about evil, and many would tell you that they believe that it doesn't even exist. People today really don't have a concept of this idea of evil, and so therefore they really have no clue that they are afraid of or that it affects their life in any way or manner. But evil is real. And evil is a real fear. And so as the Bible proclaimed that, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The psalmist wrote that as he went through this valley, that nothing that came after him or that was projected on him to happen. He was probably told, don't go through the valley. Whatever you do, don't go through the valley alone. But he said, yea, though I walk through this valley, I will not fear. But I want you to understand why he didn't fear. He said, for you are with me. You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So the psalmist understood that God himself was with him as he goes through the valley, but he also knew there were two other things that was there, the rod and the staff. Rod and the staff. The rod was intended for correction. The staff was intended for guidance. So what the psalmist understood was that God was with him, even though when he messed up or when he did something he shouldn't do, that rod of correction was there to bring correction to his life. Or when he was misguided and got off of the path, that God would bring him back because of his willingness to guide. And so this is really what the psalmist is talking about. He's saying God will guide me through this valley so that I'm going to go through it unharmed. Then he says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You know, the interesting thing here is, though evil is present, the psalmist understood that he did not have to fear evil simply because God was with him. And God made sure, based on his correction, his guidance, that the psalmist wouldn't be led into evil. But then he said that he prepared a table in the presence of his enemies. Interesting concept. You see, God can put us right in the middle of evil, and we can come out unscarred, unharmed, unhurt, because he is with us. You see, we really don't have anything in life to fear except God. He's really the only thing that we need to fear. We don't have to fear man. We don't have to fear this idea of going out and impressing people. We don't have to fear disease, pandemics. You know, we don't even have to fear evil itself, because he who is in me is greater than he that's in the world. God is so much greater than any fear, any evil that could ever come against us. I want to encourage you today, stay close to God. Listen to him. Allow him to guide you, lead you. Don't be upset with his correction. Don't be upset with where he wants to lead you. Just be obedient. Follow. He'll take care of you, even in the presence of evil. This is Pastor Ricky Fairclough saying thank you for joining us at Real Truth.
Hey guys, my name is Solomon Machado, and welcome to this segment of Real Truth with my thought of the day. So today, I'm going to be talking about probably the number one committed sin. If not, it's definitely in the race for the number one committed sin by the church daily, hourly, minutely, and secondly. Like, it's done every millisecond. And I see it all the time. And I have even found myself guilty of committing this sin. And that sin is gossip. Gossip is one of the most committed sins in the church today. You find it in church, you find it at work, you find it in school, you find it in your house, you find it everywhere. Gossip is everywhere, and it's like, you know, I hear people talking, and they're Christians, talking about other people or other people's situations, and it's like I hear that, and I'm like, what in the world? We are not supposed. We're Christians, right? And we're not supposed to be gossip. Gossiping is one of the sins, you know, that God hates, right? And so I'm going to read from a verse, Proverbs 11:13. I'm just going to read you a couple verses talking about gossip, just so we can hear what the Word of God says. So Proverbs 11:13 says, "He who goes out as a talebearer or a gossip reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy conceals a matter." And another verse that we're going to be reading from is 16:28, and that says, "A perverse man spreads strife, and a slanderer separates intimate friends." Other versions say, "A gossip separates intimate friends." So you can see, and you've probably seen this in your life, in one of your friends' life, or in somebody's life close to you, or maybe even your own life, how gossip, talking about somebody else behind their back, talking about a situation that didn't need to be talked about, how that separated close friendships. It can even separate families, right? It can even separate family members from each other because of how strong that is. It undermines the trust that believers are supposed to have between each other. And I have another verse talking about this, and that is 2 Corinthians 12:20. So I'm going to turn there real quick. And here's what it says. It says, "For I am afraid that perhaps when I come, I may find," Paul, this is Paul talking to the Corinthian church. He says, "I'm afraid that perhaps when I come, I may find you to be not what I wish, and may be found by you not to be what you wish. That perhaps there will be strife, jealousy, angry tempers, disputes, slanders, gossip, arrogance, disturbances." Right, so gossip is listed, widely known in the Bible as one of the sins that we just should not commit, and we need to control our tongue. This is one of those things where we need to control and learn to tame our tongue. James talks about taming the tongue. It's an unruly thing. Who can tame it? We've tamed all the beasts of the field, but no one has been able to tame the tongue. And it's one of those things that we really need to get a grip on, because it's so important. And so I heard this acronym that you need to think about. It's an acronym that before you say something, you should think about this. And the acronym is THINK. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions that you need to ask. 1, T is for true. Is it true? Is what you're saying true? And you might be saying, "Oh yes, it's definitely true. It's definitely true." Well, there's other questions we got to ask first. Just because it's true doesn't mean you should say it. The next one is it hurtful? Is what you're saying hurtful? Would you say it in front of somebody else's face? Would you say it to them? Would it hurt the person you're talking about, right? The next one is Is it important? Now, this is something that's probably subjective and debatable, but most of the time you can tell if what you're saying is important. The next one is it necessary? Is it necessary? Most of the time, talking about somebody else's situation isn't going to help it at all. It's only going to satisfy curiosity, and curiosity killed the cat. So, the next thing is it kind? Kind is another thing that we should think about when we're talking about someone or a situation, or when we're talking about a person, right? Is it kind? And all of this goes into taming the tongue and speaking purely, right? Whatever is honorable, whatever is just. So, so my thought of the day is basically to think before you speak. So that's me, and that's my thought of the day, and that's all I got to say.